Hey, Bright Lights, welcome back to Architecting. Today, I have with me as my guest Owen Marcus, who's the co-founder of Meld. So, welcome, Owen. It's glad to have you here. Tell us a little bit about what Meld is and why you're doing the work that you're doing.
What it is, excuse me, is a company where we primarily work with men in the field of emotional wellness. And what we noticed, and I first noticed with myself, is that as men, we're sort of behind the emotional learning curve, and it's really more of a learning thing than it is a psychological or emotional thing, and that we haven't really had the training we needed to be emotional and succeed in relational ways that maybe women have or we've had in excuse me, prior generations. So what I realized many years ago was that really what takes us out is way more our physiology than our psychology. So we work with men in teaching them the concept and a little of the science, but really some simple practices that gets them connected to their physiological experience, which naturally connects them to feeling safe, to what's happening with them, what's happening with them emotionally, and then it actually becomes easy to connect with other people, to create safe spaces where they start to feel, other people start to feel more engaged with you. And one of the other great benefits is you get clear on what you really want.
And I think those are things that, especially in the workplace, apply to everybody. So, your work centers a lot on something called somatics and how that can be the key to unlocking quality of life. And I think a lot of people this world do tend to live more, like I say, from the neck up
Mhm.
and really be disconnected to their body. So, what's so important about the somatic element if we want to be high performing and show up as our best selves?
Well, we are trained to sort of be in our heads, as we might say. Plus, stress really does that. And so, under stress or trauma, one of our physiological coping mechanisms or survival strategies is we disassociate, we disconnect. And we know that that we have the fight and flight response as a survival response. What we didn't know until a few decades ago, we have a third response, which is now they call the freeze response. So all mammals, when they can't run or fight, will freeze. And when we get stuck in that freeze, we are basically stuck in PTSD, a post-traumatic stress disorder. And it doesn't have to be from one significant trauma. In most cases, it's what I call serial microtraumas or stress. So two things happen. One, we increase our allostatic load, which is to say we increase our chronic stress level. And with that, we decrease resiliency, ability to heal and create and everything else because we're stuck in stress. But the other thing that happens is that behavior pattern becomes a default pattern. So when stimuli comes, even a good one, we might go into this stress response because that's what we've learned. And for so much of us, that stress response means we disassociate. I mean, we don't literally leave the room, but we sort of check out. We go into analysis, maybe projection, all these things that we get really good at. And might in a micro sense be very good in a particular profession if you're trying to figure something out. But to develop relationships, to be clear on what you really want and have any agency to go towards what you want, you need to engage your body and not just your head.
And I think that's especially important in a culture where we're told, you have to hustle, you have to get things done, you have to push through the pain because even if our body is giving us signals, we're suppressing them and ignoring them.
Yeah, and we're told by society to do that, but we're also told by stress to do that because the more stress or trauma we have, and the more we develop that allostatic load, the more that we're telling ourselves that, oh, the way to deal with stress is not to feel it, not to deal with it, not to address it, just sort of disassociate or deny from it. And so short term, it might produce results. Long term, again, it just builds up more stress, builds up the pattern. And then what happens, I've seen with a lot of successful people is They become successful, and one day they wake up and go, how did I get here? Yeah, I'm a top doc or attorney or whatever, or maybe architect in my field. I'm making all this great money. I got this great firm, but am I really happy? And do I have real relationships with my partner and my family? Well, no. And then it's like, what do I do to change course? And that's where we get a lot of our men. There tend to be men that, are successful or on the road to be successful. And the younger ones, that we get a little wiser than some of us older guys and catch this a little sooner and go, well, I can keep going down this path, but is it really going to take me to where I want to go? And they ask themselves, or guys that get to where they thought they wanted to go, and they realize it's not really fulfilling. And again, it's not fulfilling because they had all these little steps they took where they were disassociated, where they weren't really feeling what they wanted, physically or emotionally or relationally, and they just made that good business decision, which, yeah, was a good business decision, but maybe wasn't really in alignment with what they wanted.
Yeah, I love that you said that because, we talk a lot in the architecting community about success on your terms versus success on maybe your boss's terms or your workplaces or your culture's terms. And that sounds really similar to what you're saying, that what we think we want isn't always what we really want. And we push to get things that we don't really want and pay such a high cost for that.
And we often do, and because we have this stress, allostatic load, it builds up. We're less aware of it until something really hits us, and then it's for a lot of these guys. Sadly, it's like their wife is saying, I've been asking you for this and that, like connection, basically, and you haven't been doing it, so I want a divorce. And that's like a wake-up call. I mean, that's an extreme example, but what happens in part is that we're sort of traveling down this path in a particular profession, and it's like the water we swim in. And so everyone's sort of swimming in this water. It might be a little polluted, but we don't know that. And what that means is that we all sort of tell ourselves and our colleagues we're doing the right thing. And so the person that says, maybe we shouldn't be, is that little kid that says, well, maybe the king's not wearing clothes. And so all his peers, they know that something's a little off, and they don't want to admit to it themselves, let alone address it directly. So they sort of shoot the messenger rather than go, well, let's discuss it. Or maybe you have something here. Or maybe it's not right for you, but it could still be right for me. But because we're all in denial, when that one person in a profession starts questioning it and starts voicing his questions, some people can get a little scared and they'll directly or indirectly try to shut the person up. And then that's hard for that person because his life, his identity is linked to that profession, to his colleagues. And one of the hardest things I've seen for people is to put the relationship with their colleagues at risk to even consider doing something different.
Yeah, because if you talk to your coworkers, you're in an echo chamber. So they don't know any better. They're not really able to give you the perspective that you need.
They don't. And probably the profession I see that has the hardest time doing that are physicians. Maybe because they've invested so much in being physicians. And it's really hard for them to go, I got into this to help people, and now I'm just a clog in this insurance wheel. And, you know, I'm making less money, I got more stress, and my patients aren't really getting healthier. And that's a hard pill to swallow, pun intended.
Yeah, I mean, I actually work in healthcare, so I deal with a lot of physicians and other clinicians. And yeah, it is an incredibly high stress profession. Burnout is endemic. They're some of the leaders in burnout, and a lot of them are leaving the profession. But before we get to that, because we certainly see that in many professions,
Mhm.
people leave hoping that if they go somewhere new, it's going to be better, but that's not really true. So, what are some of the real traps that people are getting into around career and being aligned with what they really want, not what they think they should want?
I think one trap sort of is an extension of what you first said about being in our head. So our default is to go figure things out intellectually. Not bad, and I think that's valid even in this realm. But that might just take you down another track that's really not your track. So there's a lot of people out there, from books to podcasts to your friends, that will, give you smart advice. But is it really smart for you? And if it's in my world, smart for you, it's smart then beyond just the intellect. It's really what you want in terms of what have has been your dream, what would be your dream, what is fulfilling, where you go to work, you for the most part enjoy it, you enjoy the people you work with, you come home, you might be tired because you worked hard, but you're not tired because of stress, because you just feel like, you're going to the mine and digging, deeper into the mine, and you're coming out and you're, exhausted. No, you're contributing in some way, because I think we want to feel like we're contributing. And that's going to vary for each person, as it should. And so a lot of solutions, the paths to solutions are more cognitive, analytical, intellectual. Again, it has its valid place, but to also flip it. And so rather than top down, it's sort of bottom up.
Hmm.
Feeling really on a deeper level, what do you want? Which can be harder than feeling what your emotions are. And what we do, particularly with the men, to get them on their own track, not my track, but really their own track, is to get them attuned to what's happening into the body. So I had an old teacher decades ago used to say, the body doesn't lie. Van Colt's book, The Body Keeps Score, is really saying the same thing, because we experience phenomena first in our body. So we know that if we touch something really hot, we move our hand away before we even know it's hot. But our body knew it was hot. So it didn't wait for the brain to say, hey, I think, idiot, you put your hand on something hot, move it away. No, it's moved away before you even realize it. And that's just a cue of how our body picks things up. Now, 80% of the nerves in our gut and our chest, in the core of our body, go into the deeper parts of our brain, and only 20% go down.
Hmm.
And so it's like our bodies are a big microwave dish, receiving all this information, responding to the information. Now the question is, are we listening to the information? Are we not only listening, but are we, we don't have to always do what our body wants, but are we taking it into consideration? And we all have, you could call it intuition, gut feelings. And so people say, well, can you train me to be more intuitive? I can train you to do that, but you already are intuitive. The problem is we don't listen to our intuition. Now, some people, it'll vary on the person. Some people will see things, some people will hear things, some people will feel things, some people just know things. But however your medium is, it's going to be predicated on being more relaxed. Because when we're downregulated, we're not in a threat response. So when we're in a threat response, we're in a survival response. And so physiologically, in a threat or survival response, we are oriented, as we should be, out there. We're literally or sort of energetically checking everything out, and we're looking at, analyzing everything that's happening out there, but we're disconnected to what's happening internally. But as we downregulate, as we feel safe, and as we focus more on a somatic or physical experience or our emotional experience, innately we're telling ourselves we're safe, because we're not out there. We go, oh, okay, I can feel things. Oh, I must be safe. And that becomes a positive cycle. And then we keep doing that. We go, oh, I'm talking to Joe here. And every time I talk to Joe, my stomach gets tight and my shoulders get tight. And I walk away tense and a little irritated. All right, what's that telling me? And then you explore that and you use your mind and your body to sort of have this conversation, and you start to learn something. And maybe it's completely Joe, maybe Joe reminds you of your father, but you don't know any of that until you have this sort of dialogue with these other parts of yourself.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I think so many times we ignore what our body is telling us. We try to push it down and we try to think our way out of our problems. But what you're saying is you really have to feel your way out.
You have to feel your way out, and you use your mind to, to evaluate all that. And your mind might set up the goal, but rather than disassociate or turn off your body or your emotions or your intuition, bring them online. You don't always have to do what it says, but they're resources. Use them. I mean, it's like, if we had an advisory board of amazing advisors, we'd be an idiot not to use their advice. Well, we have that within ourselves, and you can develop these skills, and it becomes more powerful and quicker, and then it starts to become more your default. So you don't have to, quote, think about what am I feeling. You just feel and you respond. And a great example of that is we've all probably experienced flow states where we're just, in that moment, everything's happening and we're dealing with something. We're probably having fun dealing with it. And it's just easy. And it's like we're 100% there in that moment. And we get done with it and it's like, wow. And you have a sort of we lose a sense of time and space. Like, how long was that? And, when I don't feel tired, I feel energized. And so in that flow state, you're innately using all your resources. And when I work with people, they just find themselves there more and more. So they literally become more efficient. They can have a busy day and end the day with more energy.
That's interesting that we can get used to being stressed out so that that feels normal, but we could also get used to feeling good. And if we get used to feeling good, then when something stresses us out, we would be more likely then to try to use the tools that you're talking about because we recognize it as this isn't right. This isn't what I should be feeling. This isn't good. Versus when we make that our normal.
Beautiful, beautiful. I mean, you're connecting the dots. And I teach these guys, I said, there's a downside to this. Oh, what's the downside? The downside is you're going to be more aware. So you're going to feel your tension. You're going to feel what your body's trying to tell you. So in that moment, it might not feel good. But if you listen to it, you're going to be way better off. And so often what happens is they start to loosen up, become more relaxed, be more aware. And the biggest thing that people realize is they're walking around with their shoulders tight all the time. I go, you always have. Now you feel it, but now you got a choice. Yeah, you can drop them, and as soon as you start to drop it, you're going to feel a little more. You're going to feel what you've been trying to avoid feeling, which will probably be some physical and some emotional. You'll feel it, you'll process it, you'll metabolize it, and you'll know what to do about it. And so you're getting rid of old stress, you're getting rid of the old pattern, and you're becoming more and more aware where, in a month or so, you realize you end the day and your shoulders aren't tight anymore because you haven't been raising them up.
Yeah, I mean, how many of us complain about all of our aches and pains and just assume we have to deal with them, so we try to medicate them away?
We try to medicate them away. We try to deny them. When that doesn't work, we medicate. It might be anything from alcohol to porn to, medications, all these things that distract us and sort of give us short-term pleasure, but we're not really addressing the deeper cause. And so, I've worked with a lot of guys that are in recovery. And so, they get out of addiction, they go into recovery, but then I go, all right, I'm not drinking anymore. I'm not doing the porn anymore, or whatever it might have been. But now I want to address what was my driver for that. Because they realize until they address the driver, they're always at risk of having that or another addiction come back. Because we go to addictions because in the most primitive sense, we want and need connection. So when we can't get healthy connection with ourselves or others, we find these sort of artificial connections that appease our needs.
Yeah, yeah. And especially if the people around us are doing the same thing, we don't even realize that this isn't healthy or productive. We just think this is what you do. Maybe we even had it modeled for us by a parent or a boss at work. Like, one thing I notice a lot is how many times in the workplace there's a happy hour or, celebration.
Mm-hmm.
Alcohol's always there. And it's not good or bad. I certainly am not, I drink, but when you see what alcoholism is, you're like, you start to notice how much we infuse alcohol into celebrating or socializing, and it's just normal. And it feels strange to be the one who's saying, well, I don't want to drink or I don't want to do that.
Yeah, I mean, those little behaviors seem strange. And I was recently with a friend of mine that he now admits that he's been an alcoholic for years, but he went on and off like a lot of alcoholics. He finally, in part because he got married to a woman that has been in recovery for, I think, 15 years. And he made this choice on his own, and he's, in recovery, and they go to the meetings together and sometimes separately, and it's really transformed this man. And what he, realized was that he grew up in a culture, I mean, in England, where drinking was very, very common, and it was, as you said, linked to the social fabric of that culture. And now he's finding that he can actually have better connections when he's not drinking. So he's very bright, he's very gregarious, and very, so he'd have a few drinks, he'd be reciting poetry, and so he was always the life of the party. And so what he said was, you know, I don't talk as much, and I'm not telling the jokes I used to tell, but I'm actually having more fun, and it certainly doesn't have a hangover. And so but we get, as you said, conditioned to these ways of behaving, and and because everyone else is doing it, we accept it. But then we wonder why we're not succeeding or happy in our life, and it takes some courage to start looking at these other behaviors that might be impacting what we want.
So we've talked a little bit about how we know that we're stressed out and how to stop making it normal. The fact that sometimes we need to get out of the echo chamber of our peers or our close friends or family because they may be really in the same bubble we are, so they aren't really best positioned. And that kind of leads to something I've been calling systemic
Mm.
codependency. And I name it for my industry, the AEC industry. I'm sure that it exists elsewhere, but the problem with a systemic kind of codependency is that everybody does it. And
Hmm.
if you are somebody saying, I don't want to do it, you're kind of tagged as maybe a person with a bad attitude or a low performer or somebody who, might lose a client because you're not going to put up with certain behaviors. So it's good to do all this work and to recognize things and to, improve yourself, but it's hard to stay that way if you can't really implement those behaviors as fully as you'd like to. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
I think it is hard, and yeah, you're sort of the aberrant one often in these environments. But what can make it easier, because we all need support. And so, in a work environment like that or in a profession, innately, those environments are or should be support environments. But what I've seen is and again, I generally work with men, if that guy has a support structure outside of his profession, it's a lot easier to endure and maybe succeed in that profession when it's not his primary community of support. So one of the things that we still have in a genome is a tribe, where our genome is the same genome, what 99.9% the same genome it was 10,000 years ago when we were in a tribe. So we still have that tribal communal need. And these days, it so often defaults to our work environment, which is not bad, but for a lot of people, it needs to be more than that. So for a lot of these guys, and this is where I got started, we had these men's groups. So in these men's groups, you'd have guys, different ages, different professions, religions, everything was different. But what was amazing is no matter how different they were, we were all guys. And once, we felt the safety of the container, the group, and we started, having authentic conversations, everyone felt supported. They were getting support, they were giving support, and that bolstered their relationship at home. And their relationship at work. And in this environment, they got to learn new things and practice them and with people where there wasn't any consequence. They weren't, living with that person or working with that person. So we need those kinds of environments. We don't think that we do, but we do. And guys particularly are at a deficit. We had friends like that when we were in school or maybe the military, but for most of us, we've lost those kinds of friendships. And when we get them, it's like, wow, we didn't we not had it for so long, we forgot what it was like. But once you get it, sort of like once your body's relaxed, it's hard to go back. And then we've got I started this last group 20 years ago. We got guys that have been in that long, not because they need it in terms of changing their life, but it's their support. And it's made a huge impact in each of their lives where they change professions, you know, healed marriages, changed marriages. I mean, every one of these guys been thinking about that have been in that a long time. They're living a life that they wouldn't imagine 10, 20 years ago.
Yeah, it's what you're talking about, especially today where we're more isolated than ever. And like you said, work is very demanding and exhausting. So you come home and you probably don't want to socialize. You just want to have your downtime and be alone. Is we actually need a community more than ever, and that we need to be a little more conscious of the community. So there might be the default community of old friends who may or may not have evolved as we have, or family or coworkers. But maybe if we build out this conscious community of people who are trying to do what we're trying to do, or maybe even a little further down the path than us, that's really the key to feeling supported, but also encouraged to continue to try to put in good habits and good processes and be our own advocates.
Yeah, and it's just amazing how accustomed we get to our environment. And again, part of that's because other people are accustomed, and we all sort of keep talking ourselves into this, which is your systemic codependency. And it's again, I would say particularly for men, we tend not to even consider breaking out of that maybe less than healthy system until we feel like we have no choice, or until it happens to us. Maybe we get fired, or we get divorced, and we go, all right, it's devastating. And how was I a part of it? What was I looking at? And what do I need to do? And how do I achieve what I really want? And for a lot of these guys that have had something like that happen, in hindsight, because it was a wake-up call, it forced them to make a change. A few years later, they were saying it's the best thing that could have happened to me. And they admit, well, if I was listening to some of these signals, I would have made the choice on my own sooner.
Yeah, that whole jumper be pushed, right?
Yeah, and I've done both.
So, I think you've given us a lot of great advice. And I know architects especially are very susceptible to want to go the DIY route, which you can, but I'd love for you to share when you should maybe consider a working with a professional group like the ones you offer.
I would say sooner than better. Sooner is better. And again, with guys, and I've had friends and clients and partners that were doctors and a dentist, and we all laugh that for the most part, guys will not do something until they have to. And so, and then when they do, they go, "Oh, I wish I should have done it. I should have done it earlier. I might have prevented that surgery or whatever." So prevention is great. And so with that, yeah, you don't need to do it alone. And my goal when I work with people, either one-to-one or in these, groups or trainings, or whatever, is to get you so you don't need me or that process. Now, like a group that's, these are free groups, you can need it in a new way. You don't necessarily need it ongoing to, get reoriented, but it's like exercise. It feeds you. So the sooner that you take this investment, the quicker you're going to get a return. And I would encourage, people to look at getting or developing the somatic connection. And there's a lot of ways you can do that. You know, we do somatic mindfulness, or even general mindfulness might help, or yoga. There's a lot of, you know, old traditions and even now some new exercises or processes that, bring in body awareness, help downregulate your stress. But one of the keys is not just doing that practice as a one-off, but integrating what you're learning in that practice or that therapy or the coaching or whatever into the rest of your life. And so that you're learning through your body, through your intellect, how to show up at work in a new way. And if the work is not working, how to leave and do what you want. And we need support. Again, we're tribal animals. We're not meant to do things alone. Even a marriage or raising a family was always done in consort with the tribe and the extended family. So we always traditionally had support. And now, we are told, at least subtly, that we need to be self-reliant. And that's a bunch of crap. We can't be. And the ones that really try to be are the ones that are often suffering the most.
I love that you said that because I think that feeling of I can do this by myself, I'm strong, I'm resilient is definitely a trait, especially here in the United States. It's embedded in our culture, this idea of independence. But what I'm hearing you say is that that's not something to be as proud of as we might want to think it is.
And again, I keep saying guys are more like that. We take great pride in being self-reliant because we're told that we need to perform well, we need to take care of people, protect them, all that. And I'm not denying that. I think some of it is ancestral. But, the guy that went out hunting, he went out with a hunting party. And they would, outrun animals and kill them by just outrunning them. But it wasn't what one guy outran them. The hunting party would outrun them. So they worked as a pack. One would chase them down and another one. So, we know ancestrally that we need others to help us do or create what we want, but we burn ourselves out by, thinking that we need to do it ourselves, or we need to be so much in control that we need to tell everyone else what to do rather than do it in some kind of cooperative, connecting process.
Yeah, control is a big problem. It's very linked to perfectionism, but I also see a lot of competitiveness, which again will make you not work with people and try to show what you can do on your own.
And again, I think that's particularly true of men. And there's nothing wrong with competition. I think guys sort of like that. It's one thing to have it on the athletic field, and another thing to have it at work. And a few years ago, Google X brought us in to work with their top scientists for that whole problem because these are, some of the most brilliant people in the world, and they saw that they weren't asking for help because one, that's something that guys don't do, and two, there was a sense of competitiveness where if they would ask for help, they would be more successful quicker with less stress. So the management saw that, but the guys didn't. So they brought us in to get these men essentially down-regulated, more connected to themselves, which innately had them connect to others. And once they connected in an authentic way, they wanted to help each other and they wanted to receive that help. Because when we're relaxed, and we can remember that as when we were younger, we were always helping each other, and we would tease each other, but it was in a fun way, and we worked together as a little community. And for most of us, when we became professionals, we lost that.
Yeah, I mean, what popped into my head as you were talking was it's fear, right? When we're competing or we're overly concerned about perfectionism or control or all these other things, there's an underlying fear, and that fear is what's keeping us from doing the things that would actually help us.
Exactly. And that fear is tied into that survival or stress response. And we don't, particularly guys, we don't have a place to talk about it. So to mention that you're afraid is to mention you're weak, or you're like a woman, or you're a pussy, or all these derogatory phrases that we hear in our own head, let alone from other people. So the last thing that the average guy wants to admit is that he's afraid. And in a work environment, I understand that. And that's why having these environments that we create with guys is so healthy because I've done training with over 60 guys in a big room, and we do what we call like a little check-in in the beginning. And I say, look, we're changing the rules on the engagement. So here you get cool, you get honored for taking a risk, being vulnerable. And we might model a little, and then a few guys check in, and one guy sort of coughs and takes this big risk and says something that maybe he has never said. And rather than being shamed in this environment, he's honored. Guys, verbally or non-verbally are telling him right in that moment that he's being honored. So it's like a whole state shift for this man to go from being afraid and ashamed to like, wow, I feel brave, I'm being honored. And then guys are competitive, so they see who can be more vulnerable. And by the end, guys are crying, they're open, and they're connecting because finally they got to share what they've been feeling for years. But we can't do that in these other environments, or it's very hard, particularly when you've shut it down for decades. Now, once you open it up, it doesn't mean you go to work and you reveal everything. But what it can mean is when you need to, you feel your body and you feel the urge and you go, yeah, I'm gonna, it's scary, but I'm gonna take a risk because I'm gonna say that if we keep going down this road, we're gonna have major problems and these are the problems we're going to have. So we need to look at this right now. And everyone in the room, a lot of people in the room probably know that or sense it, but no one's saying that because everyone's afraid. But the guy that or the woman that says that, yeah, he or she takes a risk, but eventually that person's seen as not only more intelligent and more courageous, but as a leader because they're not just leading because they're pointing something out. They're leading because they're taking a risk.
Absolutely. And I also want to point out to the audience, you primarily work with men, so you're giving a lot of those examples. But I think this is important for women too, not only
Hmm.
because we work with men, but
Yeah.
I think especially in professions like architecture that are male dominated, women tend to model a lot of these same behaviors, at least in the workplace. They may not do that in their private life, but they feel like they have to show up with those same toxic behaviors because if they don't, they're not going to be seen or heard. So we're just perpetuating these bad behaviors.
Exactly. And it's not healthy behavior for men, certainly when it's, you know, done as frequently as it is and to the extent that it is. And I would say it's even less healthy for women, but women are in a lose-lose situation because if they don't do it, they don't succeed. And then if they do it, they're called all the pejoratives, where a guy does it, he might not be liked or whatever, but he's not labeled in such a negative way. And it's, women innately bring a different kind of leadership, and that's why, the studies have shown that ultimately the organizations that are led by women are often more successful than the ones led by men. And I don't think it's a sexist thing or gender thing. I just think that, women have been trained to be more communicative, more cooperative, more engaging, more supportive. And these are all innate skills for men. And I've seen them, for all these years. But unfortunately, I only just see them in the environments that we're in, which are safe. But it's sort of like for these guys, it's a safe place to practice and play. And then they build up their strength and their, coordination or whatever you want to, their skill and then they start taking it back to work. But it takes a while to develop this fluency, and you need a place to practice it because practicing at work is a lot scarier and there's more consequences until you get some of that skill down.
Well, if someone is listening and saying, I think I do need this, how can they get in touch with you or work with someone who does similar kinds of work?
Probably the simplest way to find us is through our website, which is meld, M-E-L-D, dot community. It's dot community spelled out. We'll talk to anyone for, 20 minutes and, answer their questions. They can email me at Owen at meld.community. We have, free things that we offer men. We get, a newsletter that's for men and women, a free membership for men, other resources in their membership that's free. We have a really kick-ass 10-week course that's like an introductory course that has been studied, and the study was published in the APA Journal a couple years ago, and with amazing results. It was a 2-year study on this program that I developed. We have a live retreat that we're doing. The next one's in Joshua Tree in February, which is a lot of fun. It's 4 days, and we take guys through, this whole process. And essentially, what we're doing is going through this little chart, which is a model that I just noticed that happens when people change. So, in other words, we're not just lecturing you. That's the last thing we're doing. We give you a little explanation of what we're doing and the science behind it. We do a little demonstration, but most of the weekend is you practicing these skills with other men and them on you. So you really change, you get to practice, you get really close to these guys. It's not a challenge or deprivation kind of workshop like a lot of retreats are for a lot of men, but it's quite the opposite. We always pick beautiful venues where people are fed well. And by the end, you're really close to these guys and you've learned a lot because it's fun. And you learned it way more than in your head. You learned it in your body. And so you got a foundation to go off and practice with. And you can take it home to your relationship with your family, but you also take it to work. And there's a fellow that I was just talking to the other day that did this about a year ago, one of our weekends. Amazing transformation for him. First with his marriage and then with his work. He said he couldn't imagine being this happy. And it really started with him feeling his body and realizing what he always felt and what he wanted, and then practicing, developing the articulate ability to share that in a way that was effective. And that changed his relationship and changed his work, where, now, he has this retirement that, he's redesigning his whole life because of that.
Yeah, it's amazing, and I love what you're able to help people with. So, anyone who's interested in learning more, definitely, go check out the website. I will put links in the show notes as well. But thank you so much, Owen, for taking the time to talk about this and the importance of that somatic connection in breaking the stress cycle, because we've really become so disconnected in the modern world, and it has taken a huge toll.
Yeah, thank you. And it's been an honor to, be with you.
Yeah, an absolute pleasure. Well, thank you again.